"Sir, you need to leave the terminal." The words hit Darnell Williams like a cold gust of wind on a humid Chicago morning, sharp and unyielding, cutting through the steady hum of travelers checking in and rolling their carts across polished floors. At 42 years old, Darnell adjusted the strap of his simple leather messenger bag, straightened the collar of his unassuming navy blazer over a white shirt tucked neatly into dark jeans, and paused, absorbing the magnitude of the slight as if measuring its weight. His eyes scanned the terminal, taking in the marble counters, the digital flight boards flickering overhead, and the small crowd of passengers whose attention wavered between curiosity and discomfort. He didn't flinch, didn't rush. He simply took a slow step forward, letting the calm confidence in his posture speak louder than any rebuttal could. There were no flashy watches, no designer briefcases, no entourage trailing behind him. Just Darnell, walking like he owned every inch of the space without needing anyone to recognize it. A young gate agent with tightly pressed hair and a stiff posture crossed her arms, glaring down her nose, expecting hesitation, expecting submission, expecting a reaction that would prove her point. Instead, Darnell met her gaze evenly, his voice calm, measured, as he responded, "My flight is confirmed, seat 1A, my boarding pass is valid." The terminal seemed to pause, as if time itself had taken a breath, passengers sensing that the scene unfolding before them was not ordinary, not procedural, but a quiet collision of expectation and authority. One elderly traveler whispered to her companion, "Did he just?" and stopped, unsure whether to speak, while a teenager with earbuds dangling around his neck raised a phone slightly, recording without fully realizing the significance. Darnell slid his boarding pass across the counter, the small lamination catching the reflection of overhead lights, and waited, letting the tension build like the slow tightening of a drum. He recalled moments from years past, gates in other cities where he had been looked over, the subtle judgments, the invisible walls erected around him simply for being a black man dressed plainly. Those memories weren't pain now. They were fuel, sharpening his awareness, refining his patience. Around him, murmurs swelled, a few travelers shifting in their seats, noticing the sharp contrast between the poised man and the flustered young staff. He wasn't loud, he wasn't demanding, but every eye in the terminal could feel the presence of a man who carried more weight than the space itself seemed to hold. Darnell's assistant, tuned in from her office 30 minutes away, received his silent cue and began protocol, confirming readiness without interrupting his flow. He lifted his gaze once more, scanning the terminal, letting it all register. The skepticism, the assumptions, the microaggressions, all of it poised for the moment it would meet clarity. As the hum of boarding announcements continued in the background, Darnell remained rooted, a figure of quiet authority, letting the storm of misunderstanding swirl around him while he stood, unshaken, preparing to reveal the truth hidden beneath the calm exterior. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Darnell Williams, the calm before the storm, the quiet force ready to turn assumption into reckoning, as the terminal braced itself for the revelation that would come with the landing of his private jet. As Darnell Williams stood silently, the hum of the terminal seemed to amplify every footstep, every whispered comment, every uncertain glance from passengers and staff alike. He adjusted the strap of his messenger bag once more, letting his calm demeanor anchor him while the young gate agent fidgeted behind the counter, clearly unsure how to proceed. The terminal was a mix of polished floors, bright screens displaying departure times, and the low drone of rolling luggage. Yet in that corner where Darnell waited, the world felt suspended, as if holding its breath. Travelers nearby stole glances, some with curiosity, some with growing recognition that this situation was unlike the usual airport procedure. A family seated near the coffee kiosk whispered to one another, their eyes darting between Darnell and the gate agent, sensing the tension but unable to fully grasp the reason. The agent, cheeks flushed, finally asked for identification again, her voice quieter than before, as if the force of her initial statement had already been weakened by the presence of someone who carried authority without needing to claim it. Darnell reached into his blazer, retrieving his passport and a small tablet with his boarding information, and handed them to her with deliberate care, the tablet reflecting the overhead lights in a way that caught a few nearby eyes. Every movement was precise, unhurried, yet brimming with quiet confidence. Passengers on benches and near the gates began to take subtle notice, some pulling out phones, others just leaning forward to observe, the air in the terminal thick with curiosity and anticipation. He remembered other airports, other times when his appearance alone invited skepticism or dismissal, moments where assumptions had been made before anyone even bothered to look at the facts. Those memories were not burdens now. They were sharpening him, a reminder of the patience and strategic thinking that had propelled him to where he stood today. The young gate agent shifted, glancing nervously toward a supervisor who was now approaching, sensing the unusual atmosphere. A few more passengers began to record discreetly, their murmurs filling the background with a soft, mounting awareness of injustice. Darnell did not speak yet, did not need to. His presence and measured movements communicated a command that words could not fully capture. Then, he calmly spoke, stating his name and confirming his flight, voice steady, measured, almost serene. The supervisor, a tall man with a clipboard, approached, brow furrowed, trying to assert control, yet the dynamic had shifted. The terminal was no longer just a place of routine travel. It was a stage where assumptions would soon meet reality. One passenger, a young woman sitting with a laptop open, whispered to her companion, "He is not acting like anyone else here. Look at him. He owns his calm." The companion nodded, phone raised, capturing the scene, sensing that this was not merely about boarding a flight. It was about the confrontation of bias, subtle and unspoken, and the recognition that authority can be wielded silently but unmistakably. Darnell's assistant, monitoring the terminal remotely, began coordinating the next steps, quietly sending confirmations and activating protocols that ensured every detail would align with the coming revelation. Darnell adjusted his stance, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping the terminal, taking in every reaction, every microexpression. There was no haste, no aggression, only a quiet, deliberate readiness. Travelers felt it, employees felt it. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. As he stood there, memories of every subtle prejudice faced over decades flickered in his mind. Interviews where he had been underestimated, meetings where his expertise had been questioned due to appearance, other terminals where assumptions had been made based on nothing more than clothing and skin tone. Those moments had shaped his patience, his strategy, and now they were the backdrop for the inevitable revelation. A low murmur of voices rose, passengers leaning slightly forward, some tilting their heads to get a better view, some discreetly filming, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. The supervisor cleared his throat, attempting to regain authority, yet Darnell's measured composure made any attempt at control seem fragile, almost performative. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, eyes never leaving the gate agent, projecting a presence that demanded respect without demanding acknowledgement. Every traveler within eyesight seemed to sense that this was not a typical boarding interaction. It was a test, a confrontation, and soon, a revelation that would turn assumptions upside down. Darnell's breathing was steady, unhurried, as he allowed the terminal to fill with the quiet hum of suspense, letting passengers absorb the tension, letting staff feel the shift, letting the moment stretch and settle like a held note in music before the crescendo. And in that moment, the world of routine travel paused, the terminal itself suspended, poised on the brink of recognition, anticipation thick enough to taste, as Darnell Williams remained the silent anchor, fully aware of the eyes upon him, fully aware of the power quietly contained in each movement, each calm word yet to be spoken, every subtle gesture holding the promise of the truth that would soon arrive with the landing of his private jet. The gate agent stepped back slightly, her hands lingering over the counter as if unsure how to continue, while Darnell Williams remained calm, a silent authority radiating from him that filled the space between passengers and staff alike. Travelers who had been quietly observing began to shift in their seats, leaning forward, some unconsciously moving closer to get a better view, others discreetly raising their phones, capturing the unfolding scene without needing to speak. Darnell's presence was precise and deliberate, each step measured, each gesture controlled, yet the weight of quiet power it carried seemed to ripple through the terminal. He could feel the tension in the room, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and the faint stirrings of recognition that came from people sensing something extraordinary without fully understanding it. The gate agent, still flustered, made a small motion toward a clipboard, but Darnell held up a hand, a subtle signal for patience, letting the natural flow of observation and awareness take hold. He recalled the countless times over the years when assumptions had been made about him solely because of appearance, the unspoken biases that judged competence before credentials could even be presented. Those memories were sharpened now, not as grievances, but as guides, reminding him how to navigate this moment with strategy and poise. A passenger seated near the charging station whispered, "I do not think he is being disruptive, yet everyone seems to expect him to be." The person beside them nodded, phone raised discreetly to record, sensing that the ordinary rules of the terminal were bending under the weight of the unspoken. Darnell adjusted his stance, straightening the blazer over his shoulders, letting the quiet energy of preparation flow through him. From across the terminal, his assistant monitored the scene, sending confirmations and ensuring that the next steps of protocol were ready, all without interrupting the flow of what was unfolding. Darnell moved toward the gate, each step echoing faintly across the polished floor, eyes scanning the crowd, taking in the subtle reactions, the widened eyes of a family waiting to board, the murmurs of a business traveler engrossed in a laptop, the nervous glance of a young employee observing the scene. Every detail fed into the awareness that this was more than a boarding issue. It was a moment of reckoning for assumptions and biases that lingered quietly, yet powerfully, in every interaction. As he approached, Darnell spoke softly, clearly, stating his full name, confirming his flight, and noting the seat assignment, all while projecting the calm that only comes from decades of experience commanding attention without demanding it. The gate agent, now aware of the scrutiny of nearby travelers and her own supervisor approaching, hesitated, a subtle shift in posture betraying the sudden realization that the situation had moved beyond the ordinary. Whispers rose softly, spreading through the terminal, passengers exchanging glances, some expressing curiosity, others registering recognition that the authority in front of them was not ordinary, that this man, composed and unassuming, carried influence that far exceeded the simple task of boarding a flight. Darnell's gaze remained steady, moving fluidly across the space, noting every reaction, every flicker of doubt or understanding, allowing the anticipation to build, letting the terminal itself seem to hold its breath. He recalled other airports, other times when judgment had preceded knowledge, when appearance alone had invited scrutiny and doubt, and he let those memories reinforce the calm patience he carried now. Around him, the atmosphere thickened, passengers shifting subtly, leaning toward the unfolding tension, some pulling phones from pockets, capturing moments that would become testament to the quiet assertion of authority and the dismantling of preconceptions. The supervisor, now just a few feet away, cleared his throat and attempted to assert control, clipboard in hand, but the presence of Darnell Williams, composed, deliberate, and unflinching, made the gesture seem almost performative, a shadow of authority measured against the quiet certainty of someone who had navigated the corridors of power and now stood, momentarily, in the terminal, commanding attention without needing approval. Passengers began to murmur, a collective acknowledgement that the ordinary had been disrupted, that assumptions were being confronted in real time, and that observation alone was enough to convey the significance of the scene. Darnell adjusted his position again, shoulders squared, gaze sweeping across the room, letting the silent authority settle over the crowd, guiding the unfolding awareness, preparing for the precise moment when the quiet patience of years and the strategic control of the present would converge in revelation. Every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture held in tension, a carefully orchestrated display of calm power, projecting readiness and control without haste or theatrics, allowing the terminal to sense, to anticipate, and to respond to the presence of a black CEO who, though seemingly ordinary in attire and demeanor, carried the undeniable weight of command and influence that would soon shift the dynamics of the room entirely. A subtle shift began to ripple through the terminal as Darnell Williams maintained his calm, the air charged with anticipation, yet tempered by his composed demeanor. Travelers who had been quietly observing now exchanged glances, some leaning forward slightly, eyes widening as the tension deepened without any overt confrontation. Darnell adjusted the strap of his messenger bag, a simple motion that carried a quiet authority, and let the observation continue, allowing the room to register the significance of his presence without interruption. The gate agent, still uncertain, glanced toward the approaching supervisor again, clipboard held loosely at his side, attempting to project authority, but the effect faltered under the quiet control radiating from Darnell. Passengers began to murmur, whispers growing softly into a subtle hum, a collective realization forming that this situation was no ordinary boarding scenario. From the corner near the seating area, a young traveler nudged a companion, tilting a phone discreetly to capture the unfolding moment, whispering. He is not being loud or aggressive, yet everything about him commands attention. The companion nodded, eyes fixed on Darnell, recognizing that the ordinary rules of interaction had been subtly disrupted. Darnell's gaze swept across the terminal, noting the micro-expressions of staff and travelers, the subtle shifts in posture, the fleeting uncertainty in the gate agent's eyes. Memories flickered through his mind, echoes of past airports where assumptions had been made, judgments cast before facts were known, moments that had once tested his patience and resolve. Those recollections were now a steadying force, reminding him of the strategy and control he had cultivated over decades, a silent preparation for the moment when clarity and authority would converge. The gate agent finally spoke, her voice quieter than before, asking once more for identification, an action hesitant and measured, betraying the weight of the observer's scrutiny. Darnell calmly handed over his passport and boarding documentation, the lamination reflecting the overhead lights, catching the attention of a few travelers who leaned closer, observing without needing words to understand the gravity of the moment. The supervisor, still holding the clipboard, stepped forward cautiously, attempting to reassert procedural authority, yet each movement seemed diminished under the poised composure of Darnell. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, their curiosity piqued, some raising phones to record, others simply watching, feeling that they were witnessing an unfolding lesson in patience, power, and the dismantling of unspoken biases. Darnell took a deliberate step forward, letting the quiet energy of command flow naturally, unhurried yet unmistakably present, a presence that seemed to absorb and recalibrate the tension in the room. He could sense the shift, the subtle recognition from passengers and staff alike, that this was more than a simple boarding interaction, that it was a moment where assumptions about authority, appearance, and respect were being quietly challenged. His assistant, tuned in remotely, confirmed readiness, each protocol activated silently, ensuring that the transition from observation to revelation would be seamless, measured, and undeniable. Darnell's posture remained upright, shoulders squared, his eyes scanning, reading the room with precision, each movement intentional, every pause a calculated hold in the rhythm of attention that filled the terminal. Passengers' murmurs continued, a soft chorus of recognition and uncertainty, the hum of rolling luggage and boarding announcements forming a muted soundtrack to the unfolding tension. He recalled every subtle injustice faced over years, the silent judgments that had once attempted to define his capabilities based solely on appearance, the minor exclusions that had been recorded in memory as lessons in persistence and strategy. Those memories were the scaffolding upon which his present authority rested, allowing him to navigate the current scene with composure and clarity. As he waited, allowing the terminal to absorb his presence, the air thickened with anticipation, travelers leaning forward slightly, employees shifting uneasily, the hum of whispers threading through the space, capturing the subtle acknowledgement that this moment was extraordinary. Darnell's hand rested lightly on his messenger bag, his stance deliberate and grounded, a silent signal of readiness that required no announcement, no proclamation. The terminal itself seemed to hold its breath, the collective attention of passengers and staff drawn inexorably toward the poised figure who was more than his appearance suggested, a black CO whose quiet command would soon confront the assumptions and biases present in every corner of the room. The scene was now set, every eye attentive, every gesture deliberate, and the stage was prepared for the transition from silent observation to the revelation of the authority and influence that Darnell Williams had carried into the terminal unnoticed, yet fully prepared. The subtle tension in the terminal intensified as Darnell Williams remained a figure of composed authority, each motion calculated, each glance measured, allowing the crowded space to absorb the gravity of his presence. Travelers shifted uneasily in their seats, some craning their necks to see more clearly, others leaning forward with phones discreetly raised, capturing fragments of the unfolding scene. The gate agent, cheeks flushed and hands trembling slightly, glanced toward the supervisor once more, seeking reassurance, yet finding none. The authority she had assumed now seemed fragile in comparison to the quiet confidence radiating from Darnell. In that moment, the memories of past injustices, subtle biases, and microaggressions that he had endured over decades swirled in his mind. Flights delayed or rerouted for no reason, check-ins questioned without cause, assumptions made based solely on appearance. All of it sharpened his awareness and honed his patience. He adjusted his stance, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping the terminal, noting the small but telling reactions. A family exchanging whispered glances, a business traveler lowering a laptop to observe, a young employee quietly recording from a distance. Each person in the terminal became part of the silent chorus that acknowledged the unfolding challenge to expectation and perception. Darnell reached into his blazer pocket, producing his boarding documents, and presented them with deliberate care, the lamination catching the overhead lights and drawing attention from nearby passengers. He spoke his name and confirmed his seat assignment, voice steady, measured, calm, yet carrying the weight of someone accustomed to commanding attention without needing to raise it. The supervisor, clipboard still in hand, approached cautiously, attempting to regain control, yet the gestures now appeared tentative, almost performative, against the quiet authority of Darnell. The whispers among passengers grew, a low murmur that stretched across the waiting area, passengers acknowledging without words that the ordinary assumptions of authority were being quietly challenged. Darnell's assistant, monitoring the situation remotely, confirmed the next steps in protocol, activating procedures that would ensure the transition from silent observation to revelation was seamless and precise. He shifted his weight subtly, letting the room register the change, allowing the tension to accumulate, every gesture deliberate, each pause intentional, preparing the terminal for the precise moment when the balance of power would be revealed. A young passenger near the seating area tilted their phone just enough to capture the subtle movements, eyes wide, whispering to a companion, "Look at him. He is composed yet commanding. Everything about him says he is in control." The companion nodded, realizing that what they were witnessing was more than a boarding procedure. It was an assertion of presence, a confrontation of assumptions, a quiet dismantling of biases long held. Darnell's gaze swept methodically across the terminal, noting every reaction, every microexpression, absorbing the quiet energy that surrounded him and letting it reinforce his own composed authority. He recalled the countless moments across airports and terminals where judgments had been made before credentials were considered, where appearance alone had invited scrutiny and doubt. Those memories, once sources of irritation, now served as guides, shaping his deliberate and measured response to the current scenario. Travelers leaned in slightly, passengers standing at the periphery taking note, some raising their phones, others simply observing, sensing the shift in dynamics, the slow but unmistakable acknowledgement of authority that did not need to be spoken aloud. The gate agent, aware of the scrutiny and the presence of the supervisor, hesitated, voice faltering as she asked once more for identification, the tone weaker, more uncertain. Darnell handed over the requested documents without haste, letting the terminal itself process the presence of a man whose quiet command and steady composure carried the weight of experience and influence. The murmurs intensified, subtle nods of acknowledgement passed among travelers, the hum of rolling luggage and boarding announcements forming a muted background to the growing awareness that the ordinary had been disrupted. Each passenger, staff member, An observer became part of the unfolding awareness, the subtle recognition that this was a moment where assumptions were confronted, quietly yet unmistakably. Darnell shifted his position, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping across the terminal once more, allowing the quiet power he embodied to resonate through the space, preparing for the inevitable moment when the revelation of his authority and position would crystallize, leaving no room for doubt, only recognition and respect. The stage was set, the tension carefully measured, and the terminal itself seemed to hold its breath as every individual, whether passenger or staff, became acutely aware of the presence of Darnell Williams, a black CO whose silent composure and deliberate actions signaled that the moment of reckoning and acknowledgement was approaching, ready to transform assumptions into clarity. Darnell Williams finally straightened his posture fully, letting the silent authority he carried fill the terminal with an undeniable presence. His assistant, watching from a remote office, confirmed that all systems were ready, that the sequence of protocols was in motion, and that the precise moment for revelation had arrived. Darnell shifted slightly, reaching for his phone with deliberate care, sending a simple command to initiate the verification process, a sequence that would confirm his identity and his position without a word raised in anger. The gate agent noticed the subtle change in demeanor, the quiet certainty that radiated from Darnell, and for the first time hesitated entirely, unsure whether to continue challenging his presence or to pause and observe the unfolding reality. Nearby travelers leaned forward, phones raised, capturing the scene not as a confrontation but as a study in composure, authority, and controlled revelation. The hum of announcements, the roll of luggage, the soft murmur of conversations became a backdrop to the palpable shift in attention, the terminal itself seemingly drawn into the rhythm of anticipation. Darnell's eyes scanned the room, noting the slight changes in posture, the microexpressions of staff and travelers alike, all registering a shift in perception without a single raised voice. Memories of past encounters, of subtle exclusions and unspoken prejudices, surfaced momentarily, guiding his movements, reinforcing the strategic calm he maintained, ensuring that the forthcoming revelation would land with clarity and precision. A passenger near the charging station whispered to a companion, voice low and steady, "He is not acting out. He is commanding attention without speaking loudly." The companion nodded, phone tilted just enough to record discreetly, a silent acknowledgement that they were witnessing the methodical display of quiet power. The gate agent, realizing that her assumptions about authority were being challenged, attempted to speak again, but the words faltered, catching on the weight of the room's attention. Darnell presented his credentials with meticulous care, letting the lamination catch the overhead lights, emphasizing the authenticity of his identification, each movement deliberate, measured, intentional. The supervisor stepped closer, clipboard still in hand, voice lowered, attempting to reclaim control, yet the effect was minimal. The room responded more to Darnell's composed presence than to any procedural assertion. Passengers murmured softly, some nodding, others adjusting posture to get a better view. The subtle acknowledgement that this was not ordinary unfolding slowly but unmistakably. Darnell adjusted his position again, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping methodically, taking in every reaction, every shift of weight, every twitch of hesitation or recognition, allowing the room to calibrate to his quiet command. He reached for the small tablet beside him, sliding it across the counter, a simple action that activated the protocol fully, sending confirmation to the airline board and simultaneously notifying the appropriate personnel that the situation required immediate recognition of his authority. The gate agent flinched, momentarily overwhelmed, as her colleagues nearby looked on with a mixture of confusion and dawning awareness, the weight of their assumptions unraveling in real time. Darnell remained motionless, silent, yet fully in control, letting the terminal itself bear witness to the unfolding acknowledgement of truth and authority. The passengers leaned forward subtly, the hum of conversation quieting, attention focusing entirely on the poised figure who had transformed the mundane act of boarding into a demonstration of composure, dignity, and the reclamation of space that had been unfairly challenged. He recalled, with clarity, the lessons learned from decades navigating prejudice and underestimation, each memory reinforcing the deliberate pace and careful orchestration of the current moment. Travelers began to murmur with recognition, subtle expressions passing from one to another, some raising phones to record, capturing more than a boarding incident, capturing a methodical assertion of authority and the dismantling of unfounded assumptions. Darnell's assistant confirmed each step, every verification, every notification sent seamlessly, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption, without urgency, yet with undeniable impact. The terminal, once filled with routine expectation, now resonated with anticipation, every eye focused, every movement observed, each subtle change in demeanor noticed, as Darnell Williams prepared to bring the quiet force of truth into full view, ready to reveal not through noise or spectacle, but through the calm demonstration of the authority he had earned and carried into the room. Darnell Williams lifted his gaze slowly, eyes meeting the gate agent and the small cluster of staff gathered near the counter. And in that quiet moment, he spoke with a clarity and calm that seemed to command the entire terminal to pause and listen. "You called me a fraud," he said, voice steady, measured, "in the airline that I own." The words hung in the air, slicing through the low hum of conversation, the rolling luggage, the distant announcements over the public address system, and the collective breath of every traveler and employee caught between disbelief and sudden recognition. The gate agent froze, clipboard trembling slightly in her hands, and the supervisor's face paled as he glanced at the documents now verified by Darnell's assistant remotely, showing ownership of the airline and the private jet ready on the tarmac for his departure. Passengers leaned forward instinctively, some gripping armrests, others holding phones higher to ensure they captured every detail, and the terminal seemed to vibrate with a shift in awareness, as if the very air acknowledged that an unseen hierarchy had been revealed. A young traveler sitting near the waiting area whispered to a companion, "He is calm," yet everything he just said changed the entire room, and the companion nodded, eyes wide, understanding that the quiet demeanor and deliberate words carried more authority than any raised voice could have. Darnell's posture remained steady, shoulders squared, feet planted firmly on the polished floor, the simple attire of dark jeans and a navy blazer only amplifying the surprise that someone so unassuming could hold such undeniable control. The murmurs of recognition began to ripple outward, as passengers connected the dots, observing the subtle gestures of staff as they began to process the information, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and sudden humility. The gate agent finally looked down at the boarding passes, then back at Darnell, realization dawning as she recognized the credentials and the verification displayed in real time on her terminal. I did not realize," she stammered, voice low, unable to continue her initial assertion with any confidence. Darnell's eyes swept over the room once more, noting every reaction, every flicker of hesitation or acknowledgement, and allowed the calm authority to settle like a weight, quiet yet undeniable, asserting presence without a need for spectacle. His assistant confirmed in a soft voice over the earpiece that all notifications had been sent, all relevant parties alerted, and that the boarding protocol had been overridden in his favor. Travelers now whispered among themselves, some standing, some pointing discreetly, others exchanging glances as the realization spread that the person they had initially judged by appearance alone was, in fact, the owner, the authority, and the orchestrator of the very airline and aircraft in which they waited. Darnell did not raise his voice again. He simply allowed the acknowledgement to unfold, each second stretching, giving the space for the impact of his words to resonate fully across the terminal. Staff members shifted uncomfortably, their previous assumptions exposed, their sense of control subtly stripped by the undeniable truth of ownership and authority. A passenger near the window leaned toward another and murmured, "I cannot believe it. He is the owner of the jet, of the airline, all this time, standing right here." The other nodded, voice hushed, phone raised, capturing the moment with careful attention, documenting what was now a quiet demonstration of power, respect, and justice recognized immediately by those around. Darnell's eyes softened slightly, scanning the terminal, taking in every glance, every subtle nod, every flicker of understanding, and allowed a brief, almost imperceptible smile to form as the tension transformed into acknowledgement, admiration, and the quiet settling of authority recognized without dispute. The terminal no longer felt like a place of routine or expectation. It had become a stage for a measured revelation, the culmination of patience, strategic presence, and unwavering calm that converted assumptions into clarity and respect. Every passenger, every employee, every observer now held a shared understanding of what had been. Communicated without theatrics, without loud protest, only through quiet authority, deliberate pacing, and the undeniable truth of ownership and control. The shift was complete. The moment crystallized in the collective awareness of the terminal, and Darnell Williams stood unwavering, a figure of silent power whose measured words had transformed perception, demanding recognition not through force but through the calm, undeniable assertion of fact and presence. Darnell Williams stood still for a moment longer, allowing the realization of his ownership and authority to settle fully across the terminal. Passengers shifted in their seats, a few leaning forward, some whispering to companions, others raising phones to capture the moment, each movement a subtle acknowledgement of the power now visible in their midst. The gate agent lowered the clipboard entirely, cheeks flushed, eyes wide, clearly recognizing that her initial assumptions had been misplaced, and her previous commands to remove him now seemed hollow against the verified truth of his position. The supervisor, standing a step behind, glanced at the documents on the counter, then at the growing circle of travelers observing quietly yet intently, and slowly began to nod, a reluctant acknowledgement of authority and accountability that had been imposed not by shouting or confrontation, but by composure, precision, and undeniable fact. Darnell's assistant confirmed quietly over the earpiece that all notifications had been received, all protocols executed, and that the operational authority of the gate and flight had been adjusted to accommodate his rightful boarding without further conflict. The murmurs of the crowd continued to build softly, a chorus of understanding that shifted the energy in the terminal from confusion and tension to recognition and respect, each person witnessing a subtle yet profound transformation in how authority and respect could be asserted without spectacle, through measured action and the quiet confidence that came from experience and power earned over decades. Travelers looked at one another, some nodding silently, some murmuring words of awe and affirmation, while others held phones aloft to record the scene for themselves, capturing more than just a boarding process, but a demonstration of dignity, justice, and strategic presence. Darnell shifted his stance slightly, letting his presence continue to command the attention of those around, each step deliberate, every gesture purposeful, reinforcing the perception of control and patience as the terminal adjusted to the rhythm he had established. The gate agent, now fully aware of the situation and visibly humbled, stepped back, and her colleagues mirrored the subtle retreat, a nonverbal acknowledgement that the initial confrontation had been resolved not through argument, but through the assertion of verified authority and calm composure. Darnell's eyes swept across the terminal once more, taking in the expressions, the movements, the slight changes in posture, and the recognition in the faces of passengers and staff alike, allowing a moment for the full impact of the revelation to resonate, letting the acknowledgement settle across the space without the need for further words or commands. The terminal, once filled with expectation of routine procedures and assumptions, now felt suspended in a shared understanding, a collective appreciation of how respect and authority could be manifested through poise, verification, and controlled presence rather than noise or spectacle. Travelers began to move subtly, some adjusting their seats, others whispering to companions, and a few clapped lightly, a quiet affirmation of the resolution and the recognition of fairness. Darnell's assistant confirmed one final time that all protocols had been completed and that no further action was required, allowing Darnell to remain in the terminal as a composed and commanding presence, ready to continue to his private jet without disruption. Every observer, from the employees to the travelers, now understood the magnitude of the moment, how the initial assumptions and judgments had been met with strategy, calm, and undeniable truth, and how a black CEO, simply by maintaining composure and asserting verified authority, could transform an ordinary terminal into a stage for recognition, accountability, and justice. The subtle shift of awareness settled over the terminal, a recognition of presence, power, and control achieved through deliberate, unhurried action, and Darnell Williams remained at the center, quiet yet fully commanding, allowing the space and everyone within it to absorb the lesson without force, only through the measured and undeniable assertion of rightful authority. Darnell Williams finally allowed himself a subtle exhale. Though his posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, feet planted firmly as the terminal continued to adjust to the presence of a man whose quiet authority had completely shifted the energy of the space. The passengers who had been whispering moments ago now exchanged glances with a sense of awe, some softly nodding, others lifting phones to record the aftermath, understanding that what they had witnessed was a lesson in patience, poise, and the deliberate assertion of authority. The gate agent, still at the counter, looked down at the verified documents once more, her hands trembling slightly, and without speaking, she took a step back, recognizing that the assumptions she had made moments ago had been fully overturned. The supervisor beside her lowered the clipboard, eyes wide, finally acknowledging without words that the terminal, the passengers, and the staff had all witnessed a quiet reclamation of respect and rightful authority. Darnell's assistant confirmed remotely that all protocols had been completed, all notifications sent, and that the operational control of the gate in flight had been adjusted appropriately, allowing Darnell to proceed without interference. A ripple of understanding spread through the travelers. Families leaned forward in their seats. Business travelers closed laptops momentarily, and young observers whispered to companions, their voices low but carrying surprise and admiration. The subtle hum of boarding announcements and rolling luggage seemed to fade as the focus centered on Darnell, the calm and measured presence that had transformed the ordinary terminal into a space of acknowledgement and reflection. He stepped slowly toward the gate, every movement deliberate, and as his eyes scanned the terminal one last time, he noticed the quiet gestures of recognition, a nod from a staff member who had initially questioned him, a subtle shift of posture from a nearby traveler, a soft gasp from someone realizing the full extent of the revelation. Memories of past challenges flickered briefly in his mind, flights delayed due to mistaken assumptions, meetings undermined by the silent biases of others, moments where patience and strategy had been necessary to assert authority, and those memories strengthened the impact of his measured actions now. Passengers murmured softly, some expressing admiration for the way Darnell had maintained composure, others noting the clarity and efficiency with which he had asserted control, and even the gate agent began to straighten her posture slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement that the lesson had been received. Darnell reached for his boarding pass once more, presenting it with calm precision, letting the verified documents speak on his behalf, and the assistant confirmed that the private jet was ready on the tarmac, awaiting his departure without any further intervention required. Travelers shifted subtly, some standing to get a better view, others gesturing to companions, the terminal now fully engaged in a shared understanding of what had transpired. The supervisor stepped aside, clipboard lowered, as the authority in the room had been quietly redistributed, the terminal now functioning under the recognition of fact rather than assumption. Darnell allowed a brief, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the collective awareness that had formed, and with each step toward the gate, the passengers and staff absorbed the deliberate pacing and unspoken confidence that defined his presence. The murmur of recognition continued softly, the energy of the space transformed from tension to clarity, admiration, and respect, as Darnell moved methodically, eyes sweeping the terminal one final time to ensure that the lesson had been understood and that the assumptions of the past had been confronted and corrected. Families, business travelers, and young observers alike watched quietly, their subtle gestures of acknowledgement forming a collective chorus of recognition, and the terminal itself seemed to breathe with the understanding that a quiet yet undeniable authority had been asserted, a demonstration of power, patience, and strategic calm that left no room for doubt. Darnell's assistant confirmed one last time that all systems had been updated and notifications logged, allowing him to continue toward the jet, the culmination of a sequence in which composure, verified authority, and quiet strategic action had transformed an ordinary terminal into a stage for justice, acknowledgement, and the affirmation of rightful presence. Every observer, whether passenger or employee, now understood the significance of the moment, witnessing how patience and calm authority could dismantle assumptions and restore respect. And as Darnell Williams prepared to board his private jet, the terminal settled into a quiet reverence, the lesson clear, the acknowledgement complete, and the subtle yet profound impact of measured power fully realized by everyone present.